Okay, I'm here with probably my first philosophy video in a little while here. I'm going to be finishing the Cartesian meditations I've been doing. There's 5 meditations in this book by Edmund Husserl, and I've done 4 of them, and this is going to be my 5th one. I'm not doing this one. I'm not doing this one exactly like part by part as it is in the text. I'm doing it more doing like bullet points sort of thing, trying to get the main points, because this one is a good bit longer than the other 4 are, so I wanted to sort of hit on some main things here. And I'm using, I'll show you the few texts that a couple texts that I'm using here for this. There's 3 to be exact. There's this one, Husserl Guide for the Perplexed. This one is pretty much is like kind of like a guidebook for Husserl. Like if you kind of are loose on something, you can get things down with that. This is a more, I guess, more of a complex, more of an in-depth look on Husserl. This is Husserl's Phenomenology by Dan Zahavi. This is a great book if you're looking to sort of go deeper into Husserl's work. And then this one, the Introduction to Husserlian Phenomenology by Rudolf Benedict Kern and Edward Marbach. I've had this one for a while. This is really good. This is another awesome text. So I was using the text that I have, I have a digital version of, and I'm using these to kind of get these bullet points. So I'll start here. So, if you want to go see the other my videos on the other 4 meditations, you can go to my Phenomenology playlist, which you'll find in the playlist section of my channel, and you can find those there, which will kind of give you an idea of what's happening before this, because this 5th one is just kind of where he tackles this problem which he's been kind of talking about throughout the whole book. And in the whole book he is dealing with a lot of issues with respect to phenomenology. He's kind of giving a new kind of phenomenology which is different from his works, such as the logical investigations as well as the ideas. So he's kind of, and I think that, from the from the logical investigations to the ideas to the Cartesian meditations, and then finally to the crisis of the European sciences, what you have here is a evolving phenomenology. Sort of his theories sort of evolve, and his philosophy of phenomenology evolve. And sadly, what is kind of important, I think, is towards the end, and what is found in some of his posthumous writings, is that he sort of starts to concede to a transcendental idealism that is more rigid than the idea of a transcendental idealism is not the idea of a idealism a la Berkeley or Kant. It's more phenomenological. It still retains the ideas of phenomenology and kind of gives us a world beyond our own minds. But he sort of concedes to a more to a idealism that's more kind of the kind a la Berkeley or Kant. And I do want to discuss that at some point. I've discussed that a lot. There's so many videos I've done on phenomenology itself that it's sort of difficult to categorize them, but I've done a lot of things. So if you have other questions, you can comment below. Any questions about anything, I'll try to answer them. And I'm not like this. I'm not this this authority on Husserl or anything, but I am educated enough to go through this, as I've read the Cartesian meditations a few times. Once in college, a second time after that, and it's recently that to do this video, I've gone over the whole thing again, sort of skimmed it. So the first thing I want to kind of discuss, there's a few main points, and the whole question, the whole thing that Husserl solves in this one is the problem of the experience of others. That's the main big thing here that we have to understand about the Husserl. And one thing to figure out is the idea of intersubjectivity. It's a phenomenological being with others. It is a subjectivity, but it's a subjectivity of many people. It's the and it's a sort of a being with others, and that's kind of something that Heidegger uses as a jumping off point. It says a world as intentionally tied with our own being in relation to other people. So Husserl talks about something called the primordinal sphere, or what is called in German the Originalsphäre, or the sphere of ownness is also translated as that which is that which is familiar to me, that which is my own. And the problem is how can I get people, or how to get the existence of others and the experience of the other to sort of come into this sphere of ownness. That's one big problem. So Husserl overcame the solipsistic model, and solipsism is probably the worst form of any kind of philosophy, I think, just because the only thing that you could verify is your own existence, or the existence of your perceiving self. So he overcame this model of subjectivity via the sphere of ownness, or and thus transcendental intersubjectivity. So the constitution of intersubjectivity is also to be accounted for. How do we come to this transcendental intersubjectivity, or this phenomenological being with others? So the object is transcendent and truly is truly objective when it is an object for others, as it is for me. So when I see something, to me it is objective, therefore it's outside of me. I'm seeing it as something that is real to me, and that in the phenomenological in the phenomenological attitude, when I see something, I'm not going to try to figure out if it's a hallucination, or if it's only subjective, or if it's only objective, or whatever. That doesn't make sense, but you're saying that whatever you are perceiving, the phenomena that you perceive, are there for you, therefore they do exist. So we have to make the bridge from something being objectively real for me and something being objectively real for someone else. We have to make that jump somehow. So how do we get a independent reality, or this objectivity, or Objektivität in German, comes from intersubjective validity, and that's how we get an independent reality. So in a way, this phenomenological thought, and this transcendental idealism, and transcendental idealism is just that, is for Husserl, that just means that there is ideas for a perceiving being, and that doesn't necessarily mean, in phenomenological terms, that idealism meaning just my ideas. It's other things too. It's the phenomenological sense field, if you will. So intersubjectivity, where world being with other conscious beings. So an intersubjective experience is one ego among many experiencing one certain thing. A solipsistic ego, however, is a private world with which has an inadequate account for objective knowledge. So objective knowledge cannot really be accounted for if you have the solipsistic ego, and it does no constitutive work. So you can't take the solipsistic ego and try to constitute this intersubjective validity of anything. So with the intersubjective dimension, objective knowledge is a possibility. The objective world as an idea is essentially related to intersubjectivity. So with intersubjectivity, you're in a way making the bridge. You're taking the bridge to objectivity as much as it can be in the phenomenological perspective. So the observation of others can be explained in terms of intentionality. In my experiencing an object, I cannot constitute it as something real unless included with it is reference to possible appearance to others. So that's another way we can make this jump, because if I can look at something and try to understand how it would appear to others, that's how I can have this. That's how I can understand it being, that's how it can do some constitutive work also. So there's sort of a intentionality here where my perception there's intentionality towards that, but I can also consider how it would appear to others, and that sort of does more constitutive work. And this is sort of what is called genetic phenomenology as opposed to static, because it does constitutive work it does constitutive work of independent realities and of other minds. So we're trying to understand something being experienceable by others. Husserl's analysis of a object being for me and in itself. So how is it for me and how is it in itself? But then we can so for me being subjective, for itself being, or in itself being objectively. So how can we kind of put the two together to how it appears for me, but also as a independent reality and also for others. The other, ego, makes constitutively possible for a new infinite domain of what is other. So the objective nature and the objective world for which all egos, including myself, belong. So we're also this does constitutive work for a whole objective world even. So how, if you read through this, you're gonna when do we get to the part where he kind of solves the problem as to how we can validate the existence of other minds, and how do we make that happen? And also this idea about objective nature or the objective world. Once we are able to do the work of constituting other minds, then we can kind of further constitute the objective world and objective nature. So another thing to consider is how to understand intersubjectivity in the natural attitude, and can that work at all? And then the natural attitude not being the phenomenological one. Constitutive analysis of anything isn't completed without consideration of its constitution for and by a community of egos. Constitutive analysis has to become intersubjective if a project of transcendental phenomenology is to be completed. So Husserl says transcendental intersubjectivity is the absolute and only self-sufficient ontological foundation. Out of it are created the meaning and validity of everything objective, the totality of objectively real existent entities, but also every ideal world as well. So, transcendental intersubjectivity is the only ontological foundation for everything else, if we're doing things phenomenologically. So we're going to come to the idea of what a monad is, and how we make this jump also. What is a monad? Well, first, the intersubjective framework is grounded in individual subjects making up a community of subjects or egos, not as transcendental self. So, a monad is, if you think of the word monad, it's going to take you back to Leibniz, and I've discussed Leibniz quite a bit here. A monad for Leibniz is very different for what a monad is for Husserl. Husserl does take the idea of a monad from Leibniz, but a monad for Husserl is what each subject is. Each subject is a monad. This is a sort of a modified Leibnizian idea for Husserl's purpose. A monad is a self-contained substance. So a monad for Leibniz is a subject, but for Leibniz didn't have extension in his monadology. He didn't have extension. He had only minds. Minds made up the whole universe. There was never extension. So in a way, he was kind of an idealist, but not really. He had metaphysics that sort of went against that. But for Leibniz, a monad is a subject, and that's how I haven't read Leibniz in a while. I have 2 videos on him, so go look at those if you want to know more about Leibniz's monads. And there are other videos on YouTube and stuff on the internet that you can look up for him. A monad is a self-contained substance that affects the world of other monads in it. So a monad for Husserl is like a mirror, and it is kind of for Leibniz too. For Husserl, a monad is like a mirror. It's a subjective thing. It's the substance of the subject, and it mirrors. It's like a mirror, and the person who is the monad sees other beings mirrored in itself, and that's kind of where I'm gonna discuss more about it. But this is sort of where we get this bridge towards the validation of this transcendental intersubjectivity. Well, it's not really validation, but this is how we kind of more verify this transcendental intersubjectivity, and also verify the experience of real other minds. The world of other monads are like there's this world of monads where all the monads mirror off of each other. There is a universe of monads, and therefore that is also a transcendental intersubjectivity. I can't say that word. The objective world is established via harmony of representations among the monads. So, harmonies is another word that Leibniz used. Investigation of constitution of intersubjectivity via intentional components of experiencing the other. The investigation of constitution of intersubjectivity via intentional components of experiencing the other. There's egological reduction of all otherness to same. So when he's first talking about, before this and even part of this meditation, where he's talking about where we have the sphere of ownness, he's talking about how everything else that is not familiar to me or not mine is other. So there's how when he's talking about the substance of the subject as a monad, and how other selves are mirrored in oneself, that's how we go from everything that's not familiar to me being other, for making other people, other minds, other subjects, and other monads familiar and same. It becomes same. The egological starting point is intersubjective constitution. So now we have the idea of appresentation. The other as given along with something else. a mode of givenness. So if we're looking at a certain object and we see how another mind is like paired with it, and we see how it is part of it, that's what representation is. That's one way that we can, and pairing is another thing that we're going to do. So analogy and mirroring, that is pairing or Paarung in German, and that's a found phenomenological unity of similarity, and that's pairing of subjects, analogy and mirroring. That's pairing of two substances. I cannot talk. Sorry. So with analogy and mirroring or pairing, myself and my bodily experience. That's another way. And that's another way of apperception. So it's like, and Merleau-Ponty does discuss this a lot about the body, the lived body, and I really want to get more into that. And he discusses apperception, but appresentation is where the other is given along something else. Where apperception is myself plus myself being a subject along with a bodily experience, or my bodily experience, or other bodily experience, and that's the discovery of the other, and that's the jumping point from the sphere of ownness into the experience of other minds, and all those other minds being reduced, this ecological reduction to same. Furthermore, I'm going to discuss a little bit from this one. This one, like when you read any of this about Husserl, he really does. I mean, the writers of this book, they really do explain a lot. Like if you're having a problem with some of his wordage, Husserl's wordage, all of these books are good companions when you're reading original text, because sometimes original text is gonna cause problems for you because there's wordage or philosophical concepts that you haven't been made aware of. So that's really good to have secondary texts as well as primary ones. So the representation of the other physical beings is motivated by the primordial stratum, or my bodily organism by a perceived external body. That's a apperception, which is the primordial stratum, or the sphere of ownness. In other words, so there's apperceptive transference, or Übertragung, where we apprehend the external body in analogy with my own bodily organism. That's transference, and that's also has to do with pairing, where the external body is a sensing, perceiving body. So there's a lot of, once you start to go beyond this sphere of ownness, or primordial stratum, as Bernat, Kern, and Marbach discuss it. There's a lot of transferences where you're understanding that there's different things about you to understand, apperception, or appresentation, different things about different things to understand, also apperception, and appresentation, where you have a subjective thing with a objective thing, even though it's all you. So there's more things to understand about you. Then there's also analogy and pairing, where there's association by pairing. So they're kind of talking about the same things, but there's one more thing I want to discuss before I end this video. Perceptually contrasted unities are phenomenologically conjoined, or are phenomenally conjoined by way of their similarity. Empathy. Now, to understand the idea of the monads more, a monad being mirroring others, and that's how pairing happens, mirroring and analogy, when there's a found phenomenological unity of similarity between subjects, and that's kind of how we get this transcendental intersubjectivity. There's two things to sort of understand. There's similarity that is found in the mirroring and the analogy is where that similarity is sort of found. Also, empathy. And the empathy is where, when you're seeing other objects and you start to understand them as other minds, difference between they and itself and their experience for me, and that's sort of how that whole thing sort of changes. And empathy is understanding them as another mind, to understand them as they are similar to you, and how and sort of me that's kind of mirroring and analogy or pairing happening. So that is sort of the gist on meditation number 5. Now, there was more things, but I kind of didn't want to make a hour-long video on this, just because I wanted it to be simple and to be able to, I guess, have a simple thing happening to where the main points can be drawn out. And I maybe I'll do something more complex on it later if that's possible. But let me know if you have any questions, or if I messed up something, or anything at all. And thank you very much for watching.